Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. An official scientist of the Midnight Society, you again have found your way into the Fox Den, as we are going to once again go Dogman and werewolf hunting. Yet I have been sleeping for so long and really do need to replenish lost nutrients. Absolutely delicious. I do appreciate you releasing me from my shackles. Now, without further ado, it is time for Mr. White and Starfox to venture into the madness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, yes, once again, you are tuning in to LordeStarfox Radio for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy. It's time to nerd out with our science team. William White is again sitting around the late night fire and helping us burn the timber into the early hours of the morning in the Fox Den, as the Midnight Society once again links up. William, my guy, how you been, bro?
Oh, I've been good. Life's good for me.
This is excellent. You're always super busy. So it's always good to sit down and churn out some good stuff with you. And I do, at some point, need to send you some really intriguing stuff from two hosts that have been coming on. They're both supposed to be bi-weekly. Yet Sophia and Lee are right on Bray Road in Wisconsin. I've been working.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, hand in hand with them very closely. Lee's got a farm right on the corner of Bray Road, and Sophia's right off it. And they've both had a ton of encounters and very bizarre tracks and such. So we'll have to link up for that at some point too, man.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds great.
Yes, so that's what I mean about being busy, but in a good way. You know, you always got a welcome opportunity in a perfect world, which, what is that saying? Life isn't what we plan, it's what happens in between, correct?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. If I wake up and I'm like, all right, today, in a perfect world, one podcast would be excellent. But hey, you never know. You could have three excellent people that want to all of a sudden sit down and talk with you. Next thing you know, you got 3.5 hours of your time allotted to sitting down with people. But then afterwards, you got to edit and stuff. And it's a process, but I enjoy it. And it's something, once you invest into yourself, you really get to see the outcome, you know?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're starting to see the outcomes for your efforts. So it makes me happy to hear.
Appreciate you. I mean, you've been a big help. One of my good buddies. It's always excellent. So wherever I get to take off with Midnight Lycanthropy and whoever I try to meet up with, I'm always bringing you and everybody else along that's stayed loyal to me. So I totally appreciate you for sure, man.
Cool.
All right. Well, to the audience tonight, before we dive into some really interesting Japanese lore that consists of, well, you could say shapeshifters, maybe changelings. Yes, we're going to have to listen to Mr. White, though, educate us on that. Recently, I've noticed two things that were intriguing to me. One is more Hollywood based, but yet somebody had been referring to me. Well, Hollywood is always usually trying to get the best renditions of things, but I've also before asked people if this might have occurred in that mannerism, and they would per se disagree with how, maybe this animal attacks somebody, etc. But usually, seemingly, if it's a high budget movie or they're really trying to put in that appearance of realism, gore is pretty close on, unfortunately, from things I've seen on nature and stuff. I mean, I don't know, the insides of an animal obviously are going to be a tad bit different than you and I, but stuff I see lions do to gazelles and things, well,
Yeah.
that looks pretty consistent to what I see in, per se, like Freddy Krueger or something. I mean, I'm not a big slasher guy. I'm just using that as an example. Well, this movie called The Vampire's Assistant, of course, Star Fox has this on in the background. It's all right. I mean, it's nothing to call home about. Long story short is there's a side of freak shows, and they have the Dogman or the Wolfman, werewolf, whatever you'd prefer to use. Their rendition of this thing literally burned an amber into my brain for a second, because when I saw it, its face looked so creepily like a baboon wolf, kind of fell into a lot of the depictions people have sent in. I wanted to share that real quick with you before I share one more interesting thing.
Yeah, well, I mean that's not that strange of an occurrence. A lot of people, when they see these things, they say, "Oh, it looked just like the one from Van Helsing, or just like the one from Dog Soldiers," or there's another early '90s werewolf.
Howling.
The Howling, that's one that always comes up. Yeah. So, in fact, now take it with a massive salt block. But I've listened to occultists who claim, to have been involved in shapeshifting and witnessed it happening, and multiple have said that it's their belief that they actually used a real shapeshifter for the Howling, because it is so accurate to what they experienced. Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but I do find these accounts very interesting. When people say that it's exactly like this thing they saw on the silver screen, because I unquestionably believe that that people who have deeper knowledge than us, for whatever reason, they hint at things through the media, through television, through video. And they like to kind of, I don't know if it's like a wink, so to speak, to show how much more they know than us, or if it's some unwritten rule they have to abide by, where they let you, they feel like they have to let you know what's going on, but don't want to say it directly. But there are a lot of, I mean, all you have to do is look at all the memes about the Simpsons predicting the future, right? Some of that stuff's pretty out there, but scarily accurate.
Yeah, what the heck's up with that, man?
I have no explanation for it, but other than my belief that they have some, whether it's like astral projection or what, they have some means of, foreseeing some of these things, and feel like it karmically they have to let us know without really letting us know. If they actually let us know, we might revolt, but if they don't let us know, then karma is going to fall back on them, so they have to do this in between hint thing. I don't know. But yeah, it's very, very interesting, and like I was telling you before the show started, when I first watched 300, I remember the scene where the hunchback guy goes to visit Xerxes and betray the Spartans. And there's all the different weird freaks and oddities that I guess Xerxes collected from across his empire, including a dog-headed man, which I thought was, at the time, I wasn't into this topic, but I was like, whoa, what the heck? Where did that come from? And now I'm thinking, well, maybe that's a reference to, like, these dog-headed men that Alexander the Great, encountered, and that Pliny the Elder described, and who knows, but
Cynocephali right around that time.
Exactly. Man. Yep.
You know what else, as you mentioned that, when I was running it through my head, when they sent out the younger Spartans, those wolves didn't really look normal either.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they were huge. They were like, dire wolf size or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really interesting but creepy, because same thing with a lot of people hate on the way Stephen King made his Werewolf and Silver Bullet, but that looks a lot like a Gugway and the baboon like Dogman, though.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's like, maybe the costumed, or uh, what are they called? The person in charge of costumes, or the producer, or someone is getting some sort of inside information, and even being told to make these references. I don't know, but
Wow. And the whole Ohio thing with the 2x4, when did that occur directly?
oh, the 2x4. What are we talking
The
about?
Defiance, Ohio, for the Stephen King
Oh,
openings.
right. Yeah, that was in like the early 70s, I think. That was weird because the Dogman, or whatever it was reported to be wearing like torn up clothes, almost
Hmm.
like it was a shapeshifter sort of event.
Wow. What do you think is the answer to this? How in the 70s, the reason I asked that, would per se Stephen King, obviously the man travels around, he's, considered a celebrity, but he was really focusing on his horror books up here
Oh yeah.
in Maine in isolation at that point in time. How the heck did he hear about that, you think?
Yeah, I don't know because it was a world without the internet. But if I remember right, that became a minor national story. So it was
Okay.
probably in other newspapers, and I imagine a guy like that, especially back then, was reading a lot of different sources in order to get inspiration for his novels.
That would make logical sense then. Obviously, the 70s isn't like we're in the Stone Age here, but like you said, it's pre-internet, it's
Pre
text.
CNN, pre
Yes.
basically pre cable news. Um, so yeah, mostly you're just getting like what's on the local stations and then whatever's in print.
Wow, okay. I guess I didn't realize it was a bigger thing that actually hit the news wave.
Yeah,
Because I
I
mean,
mean, this is just me. It's been several years since I've looked into the Defiance, Ohio one, and but I do vaguely recall that it was somewhat of a national story because it was so weird and happened over a span of time. It wasn't just one person meeting this thing. It was several different people over the course of several days. So
wow, so interesting right there. I got one more thing for you too that I would like your opinion on. Whether it's wild men, dog men, Bigfoot, any of those cryptids, creatures, whatever people would like to use for terminology, I've now heard numerous times people say as soon as they make eye contact, the situation gets worse. Why do you think that is?
I mean, on an animal level, a lot of animals view eye contact as a threat. You're either demanding the animal submit to you, or you're challenging it. I mean, I guess it's a challenge either way. So if the animal, feels less than you, then it may submit or run away. But if the animal feels like it can take you, like you're less than it, then it's gonna, view it as an offense. Just from that, biological point of view. Um, Now, the way people describe these things, making them feel like it's like seeing into their soul and feeding off of their fear and their emotion. If we're talking about something more supernatural, then it could be that it's getting charged up by that eye contact. It's feeding off that fear and getting amped up and wanting more.
Ah, okay. Very interesting. I just recently had fielded a report from somebody a long time ago when they had this encounter. They're in their 40s now. This was when they were 11, teen. Them and a couple of buddies were out in the forest and came across what they believed was a quote unquote devil monkey
Hmm.
slash what we say is the baboon, dogman, gugway, etc. Either way, it wasn't doing anything at first besides looking around the tree where it was up on the, like we were saying, not way up in the tree, but the first couple sets of branches, like a mountain lion would be, etc. And it was peeking all around, more or less just making strange noises. One of the boys claimed as soon as he made direct eye contact with it, it freaked out, dropped down, and then started to pursue them. So that's why I had asked that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and those devil monkey sightings, I know that there were several in Texas several years ago, and that sounds like a much more animalistic sort of creature. So it may just be operating off of like animal instinct. There. I don't know though.
Good stuff. Now, I mean, you're a scientist, brilliant mind. I had you on the hook right now. Figured, well, I would might as well ask before
Yeah,
we.
yeah.
Yeah, let's toss you the mic about some interesting Japanese history and lore that falls into, I think, the whole investigation as to what we look into too, man.
Yep. Looking forward to the discussion for sure.
Yes, tossing you the mic right now. Let's go.
All right, so tonight we're talking about the kitsune, and if anyone speaks Japanese, pardon my pronunciation because I don't. And the kitsune is more of a, oh gosh, it's interesting. It's a mixture between like a fae, fairy entity, and a shapeshifter. But what it is it's like this ancient fox spirit that can take the form of a woman, and so that's where the shapeshifting comes in. And they seem to act a lot like the ancient Greek succubi. It seems like they like to form relationships with human men, not always negatively. Sometimes it's in their legends and stories. It sounds like it's true love, and then other times they lead the men to their destruction. And an interesting thing about the kitsune is that, according to Japanese lore, they have a hard time hiding their true form. So you might encounter this beautiful woman out in the woods or someplace like that and just be drawn to her. But then you might notice that she has a foxtail or two or three sticking out from under her, kimono in the case of the Japanese. And apparently their age is correlated to how many foxtails they have. The older the spirit, the older the entity, the more foxtails it'll possess. But what's interesting about it is the parallels with so many other, legends across the world. It seems to have similarities with the Native American skinwalkers, shapeshifter myth and legend, the European werewolf, in its kind of negative form where it attracts a man and then he's never heard from again. It's similar to like these mimics that people are coming across in the woods in both Europe and America that'll mimic the voice of a loved one and get you to go out deep in the woods. And we don't know what happens, but we suppose that they're just trying to get you by baiting you out with a familiar voice. And then, of course, you have the further stories of the mimics where they seem to take the form of a person but something's not quite right. They don't move quite right. They don't talk quite right. That's what always fascinates me is when I, hear about a legend from some part of the world, especially a place like Japan, which for so many centuries was pretty much isolated from the rest of the world. And it has so many similarities with other legends and experiences from other parts of the world. So it's my belief that a lot of these things are inspired by something, whether it's actually real or there's a phenomenon occurring that people are interpreting like this. But it's my belief that it's not just necessarily a story that was told around a campfire to scare some kids and was made up by a fertile creative mind, but instead it was the way that let's say some ancient Japanese people tried to understand the world around them and what was going on. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. There's even there's a story from around the time of the Vietnam War where a Marine was stationed in Okinawa, which, we still have military presence in Okinawa. And he went missing, and it's believed, he talked about meeting a beautiful woman, prior to disappearing. And so, it's some people are of the opinion that it was a kitsune that he came across and fell in love with, and then she led him to his, disappearance, but he was never heard from again. So,
Wow. That is so creepy, but absolutely excellent. The first thing I'm going to say, hashtag nerd life, is growing up, I loved this show called Inuyasha. It was a Japanese anime. And they made so many references to all these yokai, they called them, like demons and such.
Yeah, yokai, yeah.
Everything you were just saying, I do remember at one episode they ran into some sort of mystical fox woman like this. It is so cool because I am willing to commit to the aspect with all these correlations. Whether or not, as you stated, it's truly, fully what the depiction is, there's no way all these different cultures that had absolutely zero interaction with each other could be telling the same thing without it really having some sort of credence, meaning they were obviously seeing something out in the forest, etc., that falls into the line of what you and I are trying to dive into right now. I think there's so much evidence to support that. Now, the question is, like you said, was it really what they were seeing? Could it be a different depiction passed down through time? I don't know that aspect, but I know it's mind blowing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all these legends from all over the world. Like I said, I think that too often modern people think we know it all. We have science. We have an explanation for lightning. We know why, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. We have flying machines. We have all these wonderful things and understandings of the world around us. And so the people who came before us were idiots, or at a minimum ignorant, right? And I think that's a little arrogant. I think that the people who came before us, they might not have been able to tell you why the sky was blue, but they were not fools. They didn't just attribute literally everything to spirits and demons and gods and whatnot. They actually experienced things that made them, that they then explained. Maybe they saw some sort of an entity in the woods, and then they explained it as a spirit or a demon or a god. But they weren't just making up ghost stories. That's my belief. I think that there was a lot, and especially before we had all the technology that we have today, and had totally dominated the world. I think that it's quite possible there was a lot more supernatural activity going on. There was, different realms, if you will. There was perhaps the more ethereal, spiritual realm. I don't know, maybe some sort of fae folk type beings that were pushed out as we expanded and cut down forests and made roads and knocked down mountains and all the things we've done. But up until that point, they still had a lot of sway in this world, and they bumped into us a lot more than they do today. I think that's quite possible.
Legendary, I totally agree with you because there's just so many relevant aspects, like I had stated and you are stating at the moment. I know we are going to stay over in Asia because I would like to make a couple references on that. You have all these other areas where these things are occurring. People always tend to look at previous civilizations, as you stated, as inferior. I will commit to this, though. The medieval time, we did take a big inferior step back. But then previous to that, with like the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians.
Sure, there was a lot of knowledge and understanding going on back, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. Absolutely.
Right? If you look at structures created by the Greeks, for example, sure, we're giving them a little bit of assistance, but I would like to see any modern day man-made building or bridge that can stand up like the Colosseum and such.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. There are still Roman roads that were paved, during the height of the Roman Empire in Europe that are functional today. It's not like they got cracked up and overgrown by trees and whatnot. They still exist today. They were that good and that effective in their engineering. They made things that lasted, which tells me that they had brilliant minds. There were definitely geniuses in the Roman Empire, in the Greek, empire and civilization, in Egypt. I mean, to just say all these people were, superstitious fools, I think is arrogant on our part, and we have to be careful of that.
Kudos, preach. Obviously, the Romans and Greeks didn't have electricity to the extent of you and I, but they had like running water and forms of lights all around, street lights and things. Really super, as you stated, advanced things. And now as we head back over to Asia, this first reference is going to lead into another thing I will say after your response. But when you look at the ninjas, for example, all right, with some of their techniques that they used, with the eggshells where they would grind up glass and pepper and things, I don't know. I consider you a highly intelligent individual, yet I don't think I or anybody else could take a eggshell without damaging it and make it into some sort of lethal weapon like that, right? That's pretty advanced. And now,
Sun
okay,
Tzu, yeah,
Sun
The Art
Tzu.
of War. Yep.
Again, people want to say not advanced. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did he not pretty much toast a bunch of people by putting down cooking oil more or less and then being able to shoot it with flaming arrows? Such advancements, man, which would definitely solidify you're not an idiot.
Well,
I
not
mean,
just that. I mean, the philosophy that he wrote down in that book. Sure, we don't fight wars with arrows and spears and horsemen anymore, but it's applicable to the modern day. Military officers still read that book and study it. Businessmen read that book and study it. It's brilliant wisdom. Similar to how, like, okay, we don't live in the time of the Bible, and yet there are great philosophical teachings in the Bible that are applicable to today. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule, that sort of thing, right? And so, yeah, these ancient people, they weren't fools. And you could say, oh well, Sun Tzu was one in a million. He probably was, but I mean, there were, I'm sure their civilization had more or less just as many high IQ people as our civilizations do today. So yeah, they probably had their dummies, but they probably had plenty of brilliant people too. And those brilliant people, were thinking about the world around them and figuring things out. I mean, China discovered gunpowder, hundreds of years before it came to Europe. And that takes genius, that takes intelligence, that takes experimentation, science, if you will. I mean, I firmly believe that none of these places were ignorant, at least not at their higher levels. So yeah, if they're talking, if the Native Americans are talking about the wild men of the woods or whatever they want to call Sasquatch, Bigfoot, I'm going to listen and say, yeah, I mean, you guys have been talking about this for hundreds of years. There's probably something there. If the Japanese are talking about the yokai and the kitsune and man, they've got so many legends. There's probably something there. It may not be necessarily a fox-tailed woman, but it there's something going on, and I'm gonna sit and ponder it. So
fascinating, isn't it not? Right? I am so intrigued with wanting to learn about ancient Asian history, Japanese and Chinese history, and I love history in general, but some of their really cool, I'm talking about old school things like the samurai times and such.
Sure.
Just super interesting. And like I had mentioned with the Japanese animes, they just have a really cool history. The Native American history is really interesting to me as well. But I feel like the Japanese in those old school animes and such just take it a little bit to that next level of intriguement,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. It seems I should we're actually planning on a trip to Japan sometime in the next year just to visit. We've never been there before, but it so I can't say for certain, but I kind of get the feel that despite the fact that they're a highly advanced civilization, first world nation, that they still respect a lot of their old traditions and customs and legends and superstitions. So yeah, it's fascinating to see. I mean, shoot, look at Iceland, another first world, well-developed, beautiful nation. They will build roads around boulders. They won't blow the boulders up or move them. They build their roads around large boulders and rocks because they believe that the boulders and rocks are the homes of the elves or fairy spirits, And I mean, does it make sense from a financial standpoint? No. I mean, look at America. What do? We carve a path right through a mountain or a hillside, but because the straightest line is the shortest line. But they don't want to tick off, they're these spirit entities that they believe are still there, or maybe it's just tradition, whatever. But they respect it, even today in the year 2025, and I find that fascinating. Absolutely.
That is totally, absolutely fascinating. And my sister-in-law is from Taiwan. Super cool culture. Again, I've got to hang out with her mom when she came over to see, obviously, her daughter, hence my niece. Really awesome just seeing pictures and things over there. They still have such a mystical kind of approach to like their celebrations and such. It's
Hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I think it's cool when I see, they're like, I think it's Sicily in Italy. There are
Hmm.
people who still practice, for the various like pagan holidays, and I'm not talking about LARPers. I'm not talking about like neo pagans and like, Norse pagans and Wiccans. No, these people, their families have been doing these seasonal ceremonies there since probably before the time of Rome. I mean, these are pre-Christian, ceremonies, and they're still doing them there, at certain times of the year, dressed up in with like antler headdresses and face paint. And I mean, I think that's awesome. I think, it's a shame when we lose the old traditions, and whether or not there's basis in reality or not, that's part of your culture and part of who you are, and it should be remembered and cherished, so.
It really should be. Excellent stuff again. Before I ask some other stuff, I got one more thing that I found interesting over from China because it's hard, obviously, this is as much as I can say, to really get information unless it's already been published in the past and such. I'm sure they have a ton of things that others, such as myself, have not been able to hear or get our hands on. Yeah, I was shown a really cool, very old Chinese painting of these jet black dog-like wolf things running in and out of these pillars with
Hmm.
glowing eyes as
Neat.
these, yes, this woman it looked like, and maybe I don't know if it was her husband, etc. But they're, yes, it's a super old depiction, but that shows you right there again. Wait a second, you now have another culture making a reference at these jet black wolf-like things with glowing eyes. What the heck, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like I've said before, part of me wants to view them as a physical, entity and evolution of the wolf or the hyena, or maybe some ancient animal that survived the ice age. Another part of me is, wondering if they're not some sort of a spiritual entity that crosses over, from their dimension to ours periodically for whatever reason, and they've done it forever, because stuff like that, it makes me think that may be the more likely answer. I don't know, but I
Wow.
entertain both.
So intriguing, super bizarre, yet some pretty intelligent beings were speaking about it. Just because you're smart and you're a scientist and such, I guess, doesn't have to solidify you're totally sane. They might not just realize you're not you're insane yet,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I mean, if people listen to me talk, they're going to think he's probably nuts. But
uh, this guy though in Alaska was saying from all the pull and magnetic fields and such, which you're going to be able to definitely chime in on this, which makes sense again, would
Mhm.
cause different forces and such. You have minerals and deposits. All right, that all makes sense what he's saying to me. Again, do I believe in portals though? I personally have not had enough evidence to say yes on this topic. Yet he's claiming with all this energy and things, more or less, why people in the Alaska Triangle are having so many encounters with bizarre cryptids, UFOs, etc., more or less is because it's a super highway to teleport in between universes slash dimensions. Again, timeout. I'm not saying I subscribe to any of this. Okay, I'm just reiterating what this scientist or astrophysicist, I can't fully remember, was saying. More or less now, okay, if it is this super highway, also he's claiming he's had people explain to him that they have witnessed these Bigfoot slam a tree two times and all of a sudden it opens up and they step in this area of this hyper highway.
Mhm.
Super bizarre stuff, but I just figured I would reiterate that to you because in theory, I guess.
So quantum physics states that basically we are random particles, and most of us is actually just empty space. Like, it's that our physical bodies are mostly nothing, and that it's just this,
Hmm.
you'd almost call it an electromagnetic magnetic field of random positions of atoms and electrons, the electrons really, that make up our physical form. But the vastness of it is nothing, and thus, there's an idea that you could merge and pass through, or objects can merge and pass through other objects by reaching, the right frequencies. Um, and I mean, I don't know how you deliberately do that, but I don't think it's impossible. Um, yeah, that's really, really wild stuff. Yet, Nikola Tesla, the famous inventor, and probably many people think more brilliant than Thomas Edison.
Mm-hmm.
He supposedly discovered free energy based upon the Earth's own magnetic field, which the Earth's magnetic field is caused by the iron nickel core, the dense heavy metal core deep inside the Earth, at the center of it, which is in a semi-molten state, and it actually rotates independent of the rest of the Earth. So if you imagine a ball inside of a ball, and that inner ball is rotating, and that's how electricity works. If you look at how electricity is generated, it's with coils wrapped around other objects that basically that generates these currents, and you can alter voltages and amperages and wattages like that. So the Earth is a giant electric generator, which is why we have a magnetic field at all, which protects us from the sun's radiation and cosmic radiation, and also gives us magnetic north, which allows us to navigate and all these things like that. So Nikola Tesla worked based on that, and it's said that his findings were suppressed. That's really, really fascinating. But the point of this is that it would make sense possibly that there are areas of higher electromagnetic activity on the Earth, that it's not just this perfect even field, that especially if you're talking about areas that are dense in metals and other geological phenomena. In fact, I've been in areas of the mountains where your compass just doesn't work because there's so much,
Mm-hmm.
iron in the rocks around you. That's just a small example of it, but it makes sense that there would be these, magnetic hotspots, if you will, around the world where there's more energy. And, there's talk of ley lines being these convergences of energy lines on the Earth where, one crosses the other, and that magnifies their energy. I actually had a geology professor, believe it or not. He was an old petroleum geologist. And I asked him, hey, how do you know where to start looking for oil? Like, how do you know if you're in an area that's never been drilled before, that no one's ever done any research or investigation? What would make you start to look at an area? And he told me, go by the ley lines. And I was blown away, because I'd heard of ley lines, but I also believed that they were pretty much just superstition as far as like any use. Like, oh yeah, this is what like people who hang crystals all around their house, care about, but it's gobbledygook. And I thought he was joking for a second, and I looked him in the eye, and he was serious. This old 80-some-year-old petroleum geologist who had worked all over the country and found plenty of oil for various companies, and he's talked about ley lines like they're important. And I just shrugged that off and kind of forgot about it for a while. But yeah, I mean, that there are definitely areas around the Earth where the electromagnetic field is different than normal. And who knows, Nikola Tesla talked about generating power from the Earth's magnetic field. So if the Earth's magnetic field can be used for power, then an area where it's more concentrated, you might have greater power and greater propensity for natural or supernatural phenomenon to occur, possibly. Getting to where I started this, ancient cults and religions have revered these areas of power and built temples on them, like Stonehenge and monuments and stuff, because they were very important to their rites and their religion. So do I know how it works? I don't. Do I think it's possible there could be, some truth and some, aspect of it that is relevant? Yeah, I do. So
Excellent again right there. I'm glad I remembered to bring that up too, because yeah, he was using some of the terminology that you were just ripping through right there. And as we are starting to tie this up, this last thing too, I wanted to really ask before we do let you go, as I promised. people now seemingly are having such a different description and stature compared to what it used to be. All right, just the other night I was listening to a gentleman who swears up and down this woman was quote unquote the Rougarou because he was in Louisiana, worked at a store. This attractive woman came in. It was in the 80s, so this is before cell phones and things, whatever. He ends up going to meet her at a park. She doesn't show up. He ends up playing basketball with some people, and as they are going back through the tunnel to stop and get some beer and he can get back to his car, supposedly this 9 foot tall female looking dog woman thing, which he swears was her because it had huge breasts and things, etc.,
Wow.
was coming towards them. It was a massive, just female looking werewolf thing. All right, time out now though. When we look back at like the Linda Godfrey reports, and as I said, previous reports, 5-6 feet maybe. All right, now
Sure.
fast forward 9 feet. And then I've heard other ones, people saying now 10 to 12.
I've heard of those, which is like insanely huge, but yeah.
Yes. Why do you think that is? Do you think there is a change, or is this one of those things where somebody just randomly said they saw that and now everyone's judgment is just whack?
It could easily be that. It could be. It could be the phenomenon where you see a bear in the woods and it's a black bear or whatever, and to you it looks like the biggest thing you've ever come across because you're terrified, you're scared, you're surprised, so your brain amplifies the threat in your eyes. It could be something like that. And then if you go to the supernatural, spiritual side of things, it could be, well, for instance, there's a theory that the ETs, the UFOs not UFOs, but the aliens that people say they've encountered in, close encounters, abductions, whatever, are the same entities as like angels and demons from 2,000 years ago. And that in the modern age of science and sci-fi and this, people more readily accept the idea of an ET, of a gray alien. And that 2,000 years ago, they more readily accepted the idea of angelic or demonic being. And so it could be that if we're talking about a more spiritual entity, that they're just, going off what they think will scare people the most or have the most impact or and adjusting their appearance accordingly. I don't know. But that's just, one hypothesis there.
Great answer, though. Yeah, anyone out there that has never seen any sort of biblical depictions of angels and demons, you want to see some nightmare fuel? Holy Christmas trees. I mean,
yeah,
even
with
the
like the wings
guys
going all around, the 10 eyeballs or whatever. Yeah.
That doesn't look like something I would want to talk to, right? I mean, the Hollywood depiction usually shows us either an attractive woman or an attractive male or something, right? That comes down and the white wings, they look perfect. They're tall and blonde or something. No, it's not like that at all, right?
Exactly. So, and that could even explain, going a little off topic, why some people have encountered mantis-like beings or reptilian beings or what are known as the tall whites, which are like 6 to 7 foot tall Nordic looking aliens, but still fairly human looking. They could all be the same thing and just taking a different appearance depending on what impact they wanted to have or who they're interacting with, or maybe they're different things, or maybe they don't exist. I don't know. But
Jesus, bro, so bizarre though. As always, I mean, it just ties into so many different facets and elements, which is why it's always great to sit down and nerd out with you. And I always try to send you pretty interesting things. I was going to send you some park rangers that I've been looking into, 11 of them that supposedly disappeared. Yet here's the problem. Nobody can find any information on these park rangers outside of this YouTube channel that was over 2 hours long where they did this video. Okay, they have a ton of subs, put out a ton of videos about missing people, etc. Well, does this fully solidify he made this up? No, but I mean, would you think a well-known park ranger who's liked, who vanishes in an area, people that were lifelong residents of this area would have heard about this, correct?
Right. I mean, Occam's razor would say it was just made up for views. On the other hand, you could say, well, the doesn't want to let the stuff out, so they just, brush it under the rug, remove all records. But I mean, Occam's razor being the simplest answer is generally the right answer. You could suppose that, maybe whoever's telling the story just made it up for views.
You hit it spot on, because every case we've covered here, even when I've spoken to other people, I've been able to find some sort of news outlet from somewhere about a person, whether it's like, for example, Afton Fairchild, who covered the Bearzilla cases down in Waddy, Kentucky, etc. You can find something, right? But just on these 11, absolutely nothing. And it was some really intriguing stuff, is what it is. It's good to find out it was not legitimate for sure. Yeah, as we are tying this up, would you like to touch base on anything else before we let you boogie, man?
I mean, like I said, be willing to entertain pretty much any idea that you come across. Be open to it. Try to look at it from different angles, and but don't necessarily just believe everything that you come across. I think there are too many people who say, oh, that's ridiculous. That doesn't match anything I've ever heard before. Therefore false, or I don't want to look weird by talking about this thing or asking about this thing. But at the same time, there is just a lot of made up stuff out there for sure. I like to try and be receptive to everything and mull it around in my head, and eventually I'll come across something that makes me believe it more or less. I would just, that's what I would tell our audience, to just be open to entertaining things, but don't be gullible.
Yes, spot on. You hear that, my friends? From the master himself. Well, we do need to allow Mr. William White to get back to things he needs to attend to. He is a scientist. He does have a family, and he owns his own business. As much as we would like to hold him here hostage all night for his knowledge, it doesn't work like that. But yes, he will be back in a couple weeks, and you can always check out the playlist with our previous episodes. Until next time, though, this is going to be the conclusion of the meeting for the Midnight Society. It is the early hours of the morning. William, thanks for hanging out with us tonight, man.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. Always fun.
Ooh, you legends, you. I do adore every single one of you, and thank you for hanging out with us tonight. If you do enjoy our content, please like, comment, subscribe, share it, and feed the algorithm.